Many product leaders struggle with getting the right mix of talent and experience on their teams, and getting the team right is paramount. Why? Well, because you need a team that is strong in collaboration and problem solving to achieve big, ambitious company goals and to do right by customers. And yet, because the product management discipline is still emerging, more product leaders have teams of inexperienced product managers. And so that creates a real challenge. And so what we're going to focus on in this episode of Fearless Product Leadership is how do you practically address having different levels of experience on your team, and how does that impact you and how you spend your time as a product leader? These are the product leaders that we're going to be speaking with today. You can get more information on their background by watching their bio videos using the links below. Many of the product leaders that I work with ask for my help to either upskill the product members on their team or to help them practically navigate the challenges of having inexperienced people on their team, but yet there being no forgiveness in the achievement of company goals. So what I wanted to get perspective on in this episode was really how other product leaders are tackling that challenge, and doing so in a meaningful way for the people on their team who want to get that experience and to do right by their company and their customers. And I really empathize with this challenge because twice when I was a product leader, I had similar challenges. Once I had to, at the directive of the CEO, only upskill other members, other employees at the company who had no product management experience. He wanted to give them really a second career opportunity and leverage what they knew about our industry and our customers and our company. So I had to upskill people from finance and marketing and customer support and engineering in product management best practices. And another time, I inherited a team of project managers in a company that was going through the transformation of being project-oriented to product and customer-oriented. And so I think this is a real practical and common challenge for product leaders. And so in this episode, you're actually going to get tips on 3 key areas. 1, you're going to get specific strategies around how you can practically manage your bandwidth, because as we know, if you're mentoring and coaching your team, that means something else is falling off your plate. We're going to also hear how even product managers with deep experience can still have blind spots and still require a special consideration from you as their leader for their professional development. And 3, why you should really consider taking a portfolio view of your people as well as you do for your products.
Well, honestly, I think there are a variety of different ways that, the relative experience level of the people on your team affects you and how you build your team, how you think about your team, how you assign people to different projects. I think there's a lot of different ways to think about experience. Certainly there is like kind of literally how long have you been doing this? How many projects have you been working on? To what are the types of projects that you're working on? What are the types of things that you have built? And even beyond that to, what are the types of skills that you've developed as a PM? Because I think what I used to think about a lot in terms of the product managers within my organization is, you kind of want to have this big bag of tricks that you can bring to bear against any problem. It's like, what are my analytical skills? What are my product instincts? How do I understand product design and good user experiences? How do I think about business metrics and motivating people, right? So there's all these different aspects of what makes you a good product manager. So that's even I think some element of like experience level, like how many of those things do I feel like you have some level of mastery over? And so I think how it affected me is a couple ways. Like one thing I think that's really important is when you think about decision-making and experience, I think it's important to have some kind of rubric that you can put in place with the individuals in the organization to give them the appropriate amount of autonomy based off of what their experience is, right? So I think you're striving to literally get to this point where like everyone is doing all the work and I'm just like sitting on the beach and like enjoying myself. And so, if a person has less experience, what that might mean is, if they think about sort of on these axes, like what is the level of impact to the business of this decision, and what is the level of certainty that I have over what it is that I'm trying, what the decision that I want to make. You kind of help people understand, well, if the business impact is high and you have relatively low certainty, that's certainly something that I think we need to discuss. But in a different case, it might be that the business impact is sort of like medium or low, and my certainty is relatively high. I want to give you the autonomy to do that. And so I think when you think about experience level, it's kind of important to think about your team and say, like, well, have it clear to that individual where they sit on that spectrum so that you can kind of work with them in a very fluid and sort of autonomous manner. It also, I think, affects how you think about resourcing your projects. Certainly, I think people with more experience, generally speaking, can deal with more complex and broader scope projects. Typically, I think in some ways it's not because of there's some ultra technical complexity, but it's really like the complexity of the organization involved typically increases because you just have more people. There might be more senior people involved. And I think that's where it becomes a challenge for people with less experience. It's kind of like, the herding of the cats and doing that in an appropriate way and doing that in a way where people are excited about how you're leading it. I think that's the stuff that takes a little bit of time to master. And so really thinking smartly about how I allocate people across these like more complex, higher scope projects. But it's sort of it's funny, I think kind of interesting thing along those lines that seems kind of counterintuitive is if you have a team that has all very highly experienced people, what you tend to run into is a problem where like there actually aren't enough complex and sort of deep projects to work on. And I had that happen to me numerous times over the years. And so, it's not the worst problem in the world, but I think what it means is as a product leader, how you think about your team is you have to start actually going back to here, not, product management isn't just about like accomplishing projects and necessarily like just executing and building. It's about developing this PM toolkit. And so being able to have other things that you can assign to those individuals that are helping them think about learning and growth that may or may not be actually like driving something across the finish line and shipping it, I think is pretty important. So like as a product leader, you want to have that stuff sort of in your little bag that you can pull out when you need that, if that circumstance arises.
So when you're thinking about the experience level of a product manager that you're looking to hire, I think you have to think about the different aspects of what experience really means. That I think because no two product managers are really the same. Everybody's coming from a different background, and typically those backgrounds include things like engineering, design, more of a marketing background. And so depending on which background they come from, they are going to have different blind spots. And so I think it's important to recognize what strengths they have coming from that background. But the one from the engineering background may have less aptitude for understanding the customer, or the designer-made product manager may not appreciate some of the technical challenges that the team's going to face in building products. And then sometimes people keep playing their old job too. So maybe they came from that role, but then they're not going to trust the person playing that role on the team. So I think where somebody came from is so important to recognize as a manager, to watch for those possible sidesteps and be able to either shore it up because you know that it's there, or potentially pick a different product manager based on the type of product manager you need for that product right now. So I think that's where whether you're placing someone or hiring decision, really recognizing the background is going to affect how they show up for the job. And so it's important to understand that. The other, separate from your background, is thinking about experience levels. And so regardless of how somebody became a product manager, the number of, it could be expressed in years, but it's really about the types of experiences that they've had in that role, that they're going to be adept to handling certain situations. So how adept are they at handling situations where a project is off schedule, or dealing with third parties that may be letting them down, or how do they deal with executives that maybe change their mind as to what we're trying to build, and how do they guide them back toward that? So all of the types of problems that we know and we face, it's important to recognize which of those in your product manager are they equipped and ready to handle. Because what you want to try and avoid is taking somebody that's a good product manager and just throwing them in the deep end of the pool without really them understanding how to handle those situations. So they can take on bigger and better challenges, but then you've got to shore that up with the right coaching, the right background and mentoring so that they're equipped to handle those problems. And so generally they may be on their own, but if you recognize that maybe how they deal with stakeholders needs some work, then that's an area where you're going to want to spend more time with them and shoring that up so that they've got the right approaches, the right tools that equip them to handle those types of situations. I think that knowing where they're strong and where they're weak will help you know where you need to step in and where you need to provide that assistance. Because you want them to be successful, it's going to shine back on you, and ultimately that's going to be how the product is successful. So I think that's what I think about when I try and hire. And then I think the last thing is, as far as domain expertise is an interesting one. Myself coming from consumer e-commerce into TV entertainment, at first glance you'd be like, well, how did you make that transition? And wouldn't it have been better if they hired somebody with TV experience? And what I found is that sometimes coming into a new domain can be a huge asset, because what it allows you to do is take a fresh set of eyes on a space that maybe was set in a certain way. And so it allows you to challenge certain assumptions and maybe bring a different point of view to the table. And so having a diverse set of opinions on the product team can be super relevant. That's not to say you don't need to learn the domain and that those aren't blind spots, because they are. And I think, I had to understand those very quickly myself, but I think I wouldn't overlook that. And I know when we make hiring decisions, I'm just as likely in the TV entertainment space to hire somebody from a consumer tech company as I am to hire somebody from a traditional competitor.
So the experience level of the product team or the product managers on the team will drive both how I execute and what I execute. So, and there's actually, what I would say is there's no perfect mix, right? If you have a fairly junior product team, your advantages are probably that you can get people on board a lot faster. You can kind of push through your agenda a lot faster. You probably have downsides around making sure you've got the right data, the right analysis done. You've got challenges maybe in kind of managing dev and predictability. But at least sometimes execution can go better and faster. I think having a lot of senior people helps you because you can just think much more strategically and kind of set out very amorphous, loosey-goosey definitions. And they're able to take like a hairball of a problem and figure out what that actually gets delivered. The challenge is senior people want to lead. They want to influence strategy. They want to be involved in a lot of those decision-making, in those big decisions and those big meetings. So it's this balance of, how can you include them, but also get them the context they need, but also get stuff done. So I've always found it's best to have kind of a combination of, depending on how directive the solution is versus how much of an exploration process it is. And I think that's true for design and product. And then you have to have different ways you work with engineering on each of those, right? And like when you bring the engineers along, because the other big constraint is, the talent on your engineering team and how they want to work. You can't put a junior PM in with a bunch of senior engineers because that PM will get eaten alive. And conversely, you can't have a super senior PM working with a bunch of junior devs, because they're going to be like, do I have to do both these jobs? Like there's so much handholding that gets done both ways. So I think it's really a partnership with not just, it's a portfolio across product, but also partnership with the CTO around what kind of skills and problems you guys are going to tackle over the next, 6-12 months, and then kind of planning your headcount accordingly.
So how does the experience level of the PMs impact me? I actually like balanced teams. And when I think of balanced teams, it's a combination of people who have more experience and a combination of people who may be more junior but very eager to learn. And experience comes in different forms. You may need experience in product management. So you want to have people who've done product management before, who've run engineering teams, who know how to help engineering estimate, all of those pieces. But you may also want to have people who have experience with the product itself or with the industry. And in many ways, the ideal is to have a team that has a combination of all of those. So typically what I have found is that the best teams for me have been teams where I've been able to bring in people who are pretty junior from the product management perspective, but have worked in the company, whether it's customer success or tech support. So they come into the team with a lot of knowledge about the product and a lot of knowledge about the customers because they have been serving those customers. So I can help them get ramped up on the product management side of things. Then I will bring people who have done product management before, who may not be familiar with the product or not even with the industry, but they can ramp up on the product pretty quickly, and then they can help really coach those that are new to product management. Once in a while, I've brought in people who might not have been familiar with the product or with product management, but know a lot about the industry. In those cases, the role may be, in one of the companies that I ran when I came in, I had 4 people in my team, and I grew the team to 21 people. And so I had different roles. I had somebody who was helping more with product strategy, and she was really an industry expert more than a product management expert, but contributed a lot to the team. I think that the situations where it's a bit harder is if everybody in the team is junior. Because even though I love mentoring, it's kind of part of what I do, I need to be kind of performing at the executive level. And if all my time is teaching people the basics of product management, it's really going to absorb all of my time. So in those cases, when I come in and I have a team that's very junior, the first thing I do is spend some time really assessing where the team is. And based on that, I start saying, okay, what I need now is. And for example, I brought a director of product management, and I specifically looking for someone who had experience with multiple companies, who had seen different teams, who had also worked with different engineering teams. Because sometimes when you have your product team being junior, it's also likely that your engineering team be junior. And there's a lot that product can do to help bring engineering to the next level, but you need experienced people to help with that. So again, I think that what you want is this balance. The reality is that if you're in a growing kind of startup, it's really, really hard for you to bring in someone who has no experience in product management, has no experience in the industry, and has no experience with the product. It's just too much of a ramp up. So I get a lot of people who are interested in product management when I teach at Stanford, like, how do I break into product management? It is hard, and I would say some of the big companies have kind of internship programs where they kind of get exposed to things. But really, in my experience, I have balanced it in a way that if I bring someone who's really new to product, at least is somebody who's familiar with the industry.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think it is. It's just like the speed at which you have to be contributing value as a product manager doesn't often allow for people to sort of learn on the job without one of those skill sets that you just mentioned. So, yeah.
The other piece that's very important is design. I am so fortunate that here at Lever, I have a full design team. This is not something that had happened to me in any of my previous B2B companies. And the reality is that Lever had designed from the very beginning. My CEO was a designer. So she started really with the concept that the product had to be beautifully designed. So for me, it's like, oh my God, this is so wonderful. But in other organizations, what I had to do was to actually come in and start fighting for getting designers. In B2C, it's kind of taken for granted that you need a lot of design. But in B2B, it's equally or even more important because typically B2B products are more complex. So if you do not have the right design, the product will not be intuitive. But for historical reasons, if you look at some of the old enterprise software, the idea was the user doesn't matter. It's like the functionality of that the buyer cares about. So for me, it's always been very important to also make sure that as I start building out the team, I start bringing UX, UI experience. And it is a luxury to have a large team, and it really makes a huge difference.
Choosing between inexperienced people with a lot of potential or experienced people, who've been doing their job well for a long time. You want a mix, because I found that the best thing you can hire for is what they call in sports athletes, right? So there's position people like running backs and wide receivers and linebackers and what have you. But you want to hire athletes because athletes can do just about anything and they can learn. And if you have a lot of experienced people and you have a lot of athletes, you tend to do a lot better job because athletes will learn on the job. So hire the most competent person that may not have the experience, but is like an athlete, who is smart and energetic and, curious and wants to work hard to succeed. Those people are invaluable, but they need the experienced people. So you want to have a good balance between those. Now, if you can train them yourself, that's great, but most of us don't scale. So you are going to have some experienced people to train these people. But if you find the right experienced people who are willing to mentor, and you get a bunch of inexperienced athletes, you're in very happy shape.
As product leaders, our job is challenging, but when you have experience gaps on your team, it not only is challenging, it's also time consuming because you have to find that right mix of how am I going to allocate my time to doing the job as I have to also developing my people. And so what I want to leave you with are 3 considerations as you think about how to invest in your team to help them achieve the success that you want for them and their careers, as well as what you want for your company and your customers and your own success as a product leader. And so I want you to consider these 3 things. First, let's talk about the what and the why, right? You're going to need to be specific when you have conversations with your product managers about what are the specific experience gaps that they have and why that makes both them and you vulnerable in terms of their ability to successfully deliver on the expectations for them, their role, and the goals that have been established for them. Second, when. So when is important because it's really critical that you have these discussions around the specifics of the experience gaps during one-on-one sessions and not during performance reviews. And the reason that is critical is because you need a safe space for the 2 of you to problem solve together. Finally, what you want to consider is how. Once you've identified and have agreed upon the experience gaps, now you're going to need a proactive plan for how you're going to address them. And there's multiple techniques that you can use. You may want to consider partnering them. If subject matter expertise is the challenge, partner them with people in your company who have the subject matter expertise to shorten their learning curves. If it's that they don't have the functional experience, consider partnering them with people who do have the functional experience, particularly people who are looking to take on more people management roles, because this is a win-win for the people who need developing and, of course, the people who are seeking to prove and demonstrate that they're ready for more people management responsibility. And finally, you're going to need to think about how you can set up process, whether it's more reviews of work in process or the decisions that are being made by the inexperienced people on your team, so that you and they can have the confidence that you're not going to micromanage them and that you are interested in building trust with them so that you both can use your time wisely and give them the autonomy that they desire in their decision making to achieve those goals.